This is TWiT.
Let's talk about recognition. Amazon getting a little heat because apparently they're selling this face recognition to law enforcement. And now I think this is a really interesting topic for us because it is useful for law enforcement. So the Oregon, what is it, Orlando, a police department's right outside of Portland, I think, right? They used it. What they did is they put all their mugshots in, mugshot database in, and they were able to immediately, this is a great article in the New York Times, immediately arrest somebody because it matched in the face recognition. They were able to arrest somebody. They're touting this as a great success. It's a cheap thing for them to do. They pay, I think it's a few $100 setup fee, and then it's a very inexpensive monthly fee. This is a great service Amazon is offering.
Yes, far be it from me to... I'm sorry, we've tried this in the UK. We've just had the results announced. South Wales police did it at some festivals. 98% failure rate.
Well,
you know, and
yes.
And if you look at the stats that Amazon is pushing out, they're saying an 80% chance of identifying the person out of a group of 50 mugshots. So the use case for this still isn't proven yet. And I do worry that you're getting a lot of tech firms, and Amazon is only one of them, trying to push this technology at police where it produces far more false positives than it should, and it's actively going to put people away from it. Now, if you want to see how this is really being done right, go to China. Because China has made enormous use of this. They're very high-end systems. And, yeah, it's letting them pull people off the street based on the photo, on the image of a photo.
Or denying them the ability to get a loan or buy train tickets.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they have this social credit system.
I'm sure Elon Musk would approve in some
I think
regards.
there are benefits to this. There's other issues, Brian, like the software that you mentioned that the prisons are using. One of the things recognition does not do well with is people of color. Has a very much higher failure rate with people of color. They all look alike to recognition. That's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, as if people of color didn't have enough problems with being falsely arrested in this country. But I mean, this is the problem. It's the false positive rate. It's kind of like, you know, when the antivirus industry first kicked off, people were turning their AV off because the false positive rate was so high, and you get these little warning windows. And I fear it's going to be the same with this. I mean, okay, a false positive rate of 50% doesn't sound that bad until you're the person pulled out of strip search.
Right.
You know, it's like when they start putting on the shoulder marigold, then you know you'd really like that computer system to be accurate.
It's ironic because in the New York Times article talking about this and the problems with it, they acknowledged that they used it during the royal wedding because they couldn't figure out which royals were which. They all look the same, you know.
Well, yes. I mean, God bless the happy couple. They are bringing some much-needed genetic diversity to the royal family.
Oh, hi-oh!
Yeah, the next generation might actually have chins.
Darker-skinned women are according to MIT, misidentified up to 35% of the time by facial, not by Amazon specifically, but by generally by facial recognition software. But there are some success stories. In fact, the New York Times article talks about Madison Square Garden using it. They have cameras when you enter Madison Square Garden and you go through the metal detector. There's a big camera on it, and it's looking at you and matching you up to a database of known troublemakers, so they can isolate people, hooligans. You know about hooligans.
We're the hooligans.
And keep them out of the concert. I'm not sure I'm against that, but that's a little different because that's a use by a private company in a private setting where the right to pass is really controlled by that company. It's not used by a government. That's a...
Yeah, I mean, if it works, fine. But, sorry, Brian.
The question we're going to have to ask here is, my first question to Amazon would be, are you, as a private company, willing to be openly accessible through the Freedom of Information Act? Or are you going to consider your technology proprietary?
Oh, that's interesting.
Because this is the challenge that ProPublica had in figuring out whether the software that was being used by parole boards was actually systematically discriminating against someone. It's a private company that was intellectual property, and it was very hard for them to get access. And this is the difference between private companies like Google and Facebook using software. And, you know, I think it was Microsoft who put out a TWiT or something like that. And within 24 hours, it became a racist, engine. And, but that has
remember
impact.
Tay? Those were the days.
They did not see that coming.
And so, the difference between the government and a private company is that a government can garnish your wages.
Right.
A government can put you in jail. Google and Facebook can do neither of those things. And so because of that, the government has to be responsible to the people. And that's why we have things like the Freedom of Information Act to do that. But private companies aren't subjected to that. And so this really, it's great to see the ACLU standing up here, because really this is our 21st century civil rights.
Well, and it's also interesting to think about corner cases where it's not just people, it's things like license plate recognition.
Right?
Yeah.
Because on one hand, you've got the privacy to drive around everywhere, but if there's cameras at every, large main street intersection that can do license plate recognition, then you can back that out and figure out where people are going. And then the really tricky question turns into, okay, some of this stuff is commercial service, but some of this is open source. And so if this stuff is available as open source, should you say, okay, a company can use it, but then a government can't use it, and under what conditions should you restrict the use of that? Because you can imagine then a private company doing it and then licensing or selling those results to the government.
Well, you were still at Google, I remember, when they announced that they had face recognition in Google Photos, I think it was, and they said, but we're not going to let people use it to identify people on the street because of the very real threat of stalking and so forth.
Yeah.
That's the right way to approach this, is to think about the ethical implications of what you're doing and try to limit the bad use cases, I would think.
It helps, but you can never foresee all the different corner cases. Like somebody thinks they've anonymized data, and it turns out somebody comes out with a completely new, approach that people haven't thought of, and they de-anonymize it. And so it's a really tricky thing, and we might just have to say, in 10 years, okay, we're living in a William Gibson novel, and
I think we are already. I hate to say it. By the way, Google does have jails. You know that.
Only for your search results, not for people. So,
Matt, for years, was the guy in charge of search and keeping spam out of search.
I heard that phrase, and I was like, well,
we have jails. It's a different kind of jail. Yeah, but you don't want to get in it. That's true. Yeah.
If I apply for a credit card and I get denied because of something on my credit report, then I have a right. And that right is to get access to that credit report and see if there are any errors on it. And if there are, I have the right to go back to the bank and remove those errors. And then I have the right to go back and apply for that credit and get access to the credit. So my question then is, what rights do we have with private sector companies using facial recognition with the government? Or what rights do we have with artificial intelligence when it's used to make so many decisions that impact our personal lives?
Well, and to take Brian's point, I think the stuff that they do for credit, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, is pretty good, because you're actually able to say, okay, what information do you have? And if something's inaccurate or wrong, then you can say, okay, this has to be corrected. I think the tricky bit is when you take that a step further, whenever you have a transaction and there's someone on both sides of the transaction. So you buy, diapers from the grocery store. Yes, you have bought those diapers, but then the grocery store also knows that you've bought those diapers. And so at what point do you say, okay, Pizza Hut, you're not allowed to sell information to other people? Or maybe you make that a promise or a brand where you can say, okay, I will only use the companies that agree to these higher ethical standards that say they're not going to sell the information to third parties, for example.